The idea of raising the senior age at which one becomes eligible for free subway rides here in Seoul has ignited much debate of the broader issues of retirement age and elderly benefits. So when is a person officially old? What do the elderly think about senior age and related benefits? How does career status compare to that of its counterparts? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we address plans to raise the senior age that allows Koreans access to related benefits. For more on this, I have Professor Kim Jun-mo from Konkuk University here in the studio. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure to be here.
I also have Kwon Soa, as always, with us. Soa, again, it's good to see you.
Happy to be here, Sunny.
Right, Professor Kim, we'll start with you then. At present, here in South Korea, when are people considered to be old enough for senior benefits, and how does this age compare to that of other countries?
Yeah, welfare law for the elderly was promulgated in 1981, and related presidential order was made in 1984. This prescribed people of age 65 and higher as senior members eligible for free services. But national pension starts at 62, and basic old age pension for economically disadvantaged people start at 65. So there is a divergence in starting ages. And when you go to other countries, if you are 65 or higher in the United States, you get 50% off for your transportation. In France, that's 62 years old with 50% discount. UK, 60 with 100% free. Japan is peculiar because they have 70-year entrance age, but it's unlimited access. Germany, railroad from 60, buses from 65. So there is a spectrum.
And also here in Korea, that we can assume it's 65 years old, is it, for free subway here in capital Seoul? And there are plans to raise that age, right?
Possibly.
Right. So I understand the elderly here in the country, though, have a different age in mind when they're asked when a person can be considered to be officially old, right?
Right. This is according to a survey that has been conducted by the Seoul Metropolitan government, and it was released last week. And it found that 72.6 years was the average age at which elderly people here in the capital perceived old age to start. That meaning it's not only 7.6 years older than the current official standard of 65, but it's also 2.6 years higher than the proposed age in talks, which is 70. Now, this survey, which was conducted for 2 months last year, asked 3,010 people born 1957 or earlier, and the average age of the respondents was 73.5, with more than 35% of those between 65 and 69 years old. Now, people in this age bracket also showed changing trends in daily lives. For example, when it comes to smartphone use or internet use, 83.7% said they are using a smartphone, and 1 out of 4 said they use the internet frequently to look for information. Also, there was a change in the proportion of working seniors compared to the past. When we compare the figure from 2018 to currently, in 2018, 35.1% were in the workforce. Now the proportion has gone up to 41.6%, and also more of them wanted to continue to work. Now, while Seoul City's survey, which is a biannual one, is being conducted to use the data to improve the quality of life of the elderly in Seoul and then establish according policies, in terms of the age that the older population believes is considered old, this could actually also influence the raising or not raising the cutoff age for senior citizens.
Right, of course. And that being said, Professor Kim, in recent days, there have been calls for a raise in the age of senior citizens allowed to take the subway free here in capital Seoul. Do tell us a bit about the reason behind this reality. And do you suppose the move itself, that is raising the senior age, will actually serve to solve the problem?
Yeah, there are confluences of 3 reasons, I think. First is average life expectancy being increased. As of this year, life expectancy is about 83.5 years in Korea. Make an international comparison, France is 83, Italy is 84, UK 81, United States 79. So life expectancy figures is not that bad for Koreans. And secondly, we have low birth rate phenomenon, which has been persistent more than 2 decades. And younger generation people feel that as a financial threat for their future. And thirdly, we have pressed public sector to reform. So subway system also had pressure to improve their performance. So putting those 3 streams together with life expectancy being increased, it's very natural that healthcare expenditure, pension expenditure will go up while long-term productivity of society will go down. That means people should work longer and people will be concerned about this. And this concern ignited recent debate on potential pension reform and also opened the doors for changing the old age standards. And going back to your question regarding whether this will help to solve this problem, I would say partly yes, because I will cite news sources. According to a news source, Seoul subway system claimed that they lost 1 billion Korean won loss last year, which can be attributable to free senior services. And to evaluate that, we should understand their context. That is, they have been under pressure from increased electricity price, and they also have labor dispute to press wages. Also, they got pressure from society and from central government for their managerial reform. So this senior fare issue could be one outlet to partly solve this problem.
Right, and staying with public transport, so this is something that Professor Kim touched on earlier on in the program. But for the sake of comparison, perhaps you can add on to the comparison between the situation here in South Korea and abroad, its partners abroad, of course, with regard to free public transport for senior citizens.
Sure. Well, Korea is not the only country that has special benefits for elderly citizens, but according to numerous reports, major cities or countries in the world do not necessarily provide free public transport like here in Korea, but rather discounted prices for transport fares. So Professor Kim did mention at the beginning, but let's take a look at this table now for some of the details. So you can see the major cities and countries on the left side that we're going to look at: New York in the US, France, London in the UK, Tokyo in Japan, and Germany. And then we have the means of transport for which they provide benefits, and then the age. So in London, for instance, we see that elderly people aged 60 and above already do get discounts, or actually there they do provide 100% free rides, I should say, for buses, trams, and subway. But then there is a difference in the age. In Germany, for instance, for trains, you get free rides if you're aged 60 and above, and for buses, if you're aged 65 or above, and that's for a 50% discount. Now, there is a different system in neighboring Japan, in Tokyo. If we take a look at there, when you're aged 70 or above, you can purchase a yearly unlimited pass for buses or subway, and that costs either around $8 or $160. There's a difference because the $8 is for those in the lower income bracket among seniors, and then the others pay around $160, and then they can have access to all of the buses and subways throughout the year. But this, as I said, is for Tokyo, and there are differences by city, and there are some cities that are trying to raise the year to 70, just like in Tokyo. And I also wanted to mention, as we have been talking about how the capital Seoul is mulling over whether they should extend the age. Actually, in Daegu, there are also talks about already discussions being made made among the politicians and the municipality of whether to raise the age to 70. So it depends in many countries also by city and also whether they are being provided by the government or by their city regarding those fares.
Right, so currently all those aged 65 and above are able to take the public transport for free here in Seoul, and of course discussions are happening in Daegu, as Soa just mentioned. Broadly speaking then, Professor Kim, what are the prospects of raising the age at which a person is considered a senior citizen here in Korea, and what look to be the gains of such a raise?
Recently, we experienced age counting issue, and people agreed on the position that we'll go for the westernized, modernized age counting.
Which is why I didn't age this year, and neither did you, right?
Yeah, yes. And since we experienced that, plus with economic situations getting harder and tighter, it's very likely that we may have to go to the consensus to move to tighter area. And going to the question regarding the gains, I can mention 4 things. First, depletion of national pension, which is expected to be in 2055, can be extended significantly because people will pay longer. Secondly, central government and local government finance on welfare expenditure can be improved. As the case we have just discussed with the Seoul subway system, there are many other systems under a similar situation. Thirdly, intergenerational conflict can be diluted because younger generation will see, well, things are getting much just way. They think their financial burden for the future is reduced. And fourth, since we have different programs for senior people and retirees that have maintained different starting ages, those can be unified into one age possibly, and that will be counted as indirectly government reform effect to streamline government functioning.
Right, I see. So those are the potential benefits then.
Yes.
And so that being said, what has been the overall response, if I may, to efforts to change the age of the elderly here in the country?
Well, I think both the elderly and the younger people do agree that there needs to be a raise in what we refer to as the official old age, because quite obviously our life expectancy has gone up. I think Professor Kim mentioned earlier 83.6 or 5. So everything's gone up. It's not only the life expectancy, but people get married much later. People get kids much later. So this is a natural development. Many elderly, as I mentioned before, also in the survey that has been conducted by the Seoul city government, many elderly want to work for a longer time also, and that's not just out of financial reasons, but also because they are still fit and enjoy working. And that's also, since this debate has been going on recently, people that have been interviewed, elderly people, regarding this issue have been mentioning that they do not feel the age they are. They feel much younger, and they feel they want to work for a longer period. So yeah, I think the general consensus is that the age has to be raised, but when it comes to matters of raising the age for free subway rides, for instance, then opinions are a little more divided. And many believe that if there's going to be a change, for instance, with the subway system, it should be made along with other changes. So the general age of what refers to what's going to be referred to as old age should go up, and that would include also the retirement age.
Right. Professor Kim, some people believe that the delayed access to social benefits that come with being recognized as a senior citizen will ultimately aggravate the poverty rate of Korea's seniors, which is already, I believe, at a very high amongst members of the OECD. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, it is a cold fact that Korean senior citizens, in terms of poverty statistics, are not in good state, especially when you compare with OECD countries. And as you mentioned, we may be aggravating their situation, but we may have to take a two-track approach of balancing act. One pillar is we have to increase sustainability of our society's financial structure in line with increasing life expectancy, increasing healthcare expenditure, pension expenditure, plus increased healthy condition of elders. That's one pillar. Second pillar is intensive targeting of those elders who we should really take care of. So, in general, general benefits being reduced, but targeted benefits being increased should be our solution.
Do you think it will be possible for the government to take on this big burden? I understand it's a very general question, but based on your observation of events here in the country thus far, are we able to handle or shoulder that burden, the government itself?
It's not such an issue that we can resolve within 6 months or so, but since the time bomb is coming, we'll have to do it within several years.
It needs to be a long-term plan, this two-track policy.
Not that long, but midterm, I would say.
Hopefully.
Yes.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. And so, what other problems could arise from raising the minimum retirement age, do you think?
Well, whenever there are discussions or changes regarding labor issues among the elderly population, it's the younger population that's concerned. If the minimum retirement age is raised, it means a bigger elderly workforce at companies, while the amount of people that can be hired at one firm isn't necessarily increased. And in reality, studies do suggest that the raising of the retirement age from the mid-50s to the current 60, that move having begun in 2016, has in fact resulted in a decline of jobs for young people below the age of 30. According to the state-run Korea Development Institute, following the extension of the retirement to age 60 at businesses in the private sector, for every one older worker who was subject to the change, the number of new recruits among young workers went down by 0.6. And in the past months, if we look at some employment figures, there have been positive and negative aspects, but the number of jobs in general increased, while youth unemployment remains a big problem. In fact, the number of employment insurance subscribers continued to increased last month, but the number of subscribers in their teens and 20s decreased for 5 consecutive months. The employment rate for Korean youth aged 15 to 29 is also well below the OECD average. And also, as Professor Kim earlier mentioned, this could also lead to intergenerational conflict in the end.
Right. Professor Kim, how should the government seek to implement changes to the age of the elderly if it is indeed an inevitable process, do you think?
Well, conditions are imminent, but the problem is people are not ready to accept the reality. So government should work on building consensus. So government should do first do public hearing-like activities to build consensus. And second, government ministries, think tanks, and universities should maintain a dialogue to develop this issue for our context. And thirdly, as a whole, our society should begin making a consensus for sustainability built into next generation. Dialogue between generations. That's what we should do.
I see. Speaking as a scholar, that is a professor within a university and academic environment, do you suppose most professors within your environment would support the idea of raising the retirement age for professors? What do you think?
I think more than half, I believe, are willing to work, but that should not keep young scholars from actively participating in the field. So we should find a proper role, which could be a new one, which beyond our conception
Current
right
ones.
now, yes.
Right, I see. So beyond Korea, protesters, I understand, over in France, of course, have been taking to the streets in response to government plans to raise the retirement age. Now, quite contrary to the situation here, where quite a number of senior citizens feel they're young and they want to work, I understand quite a few of their counterparts over in France do not feel the same.
Right. Well, first off, the French government is pushing for extending the retirement age to 64 from the current 62, and it's part of President Emmanuel Macron's flagship reform package that aims to ensure that France can finance its future pension system. However, the plan is not welcomed by everyone. On Saturday, almost 1 million protesters took to the streets in numerous cities, including Paris, Nice, Marseille, and Toulouse, calling on the government to withdraw its plan. At times, clashes erupted between demonstrators and the police. And also earlier on January 31st, France's largest union, CGT, said that at least 2 million people took part in the demonstrations. The government put the number at a little over 1.1 million. Now, Saturday was the fourth day of nationwide rallies that started last month, with the next round planned for Thursday. Recent public opinion polls found that around 2/3 who are still in the labor market oppose the reform, and some 60% of people who already retired are in favor of it. It wouldn't really matter for them, of course. Now, France has one of the lowest retirement ages actually in the world. As I said, it's at 62. And if you compare it to other European countries, in Spain, it's 65, in the UK, 67, and there is a plan to increase it to 68 in 2044. In Germany, it's 67, and discussions are to raise it to 70. Now, French citizens have been demonstrating their opposition to similar programs in the past years. In 2019, the government proposed a so-called points-based system that would allow someone to retire once they gained a specific number of points. And this led to one of the largest demonstrations in France's history. And then with the COVID-19 pandemic also breaking out, the government was forced to abandon the measure. But it is now trying to push ahead with this new plan now. And I really, as you mentioned, Sunny, quite the opposite ambiance compared to Korea. I found it really interesting how many people in France do not want to raise the retirement age. So for them, I think the priority is to have, after working for all these years, they want to enjoy life without having to work.
Right, which of course is completely understandable.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll agree. Professor Kim, what countermeasures do you propose to tackle the possible repercussions, if I may, of raising the age of seniors here in the country?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I will start with a comparison. There are scholars who will try to compare health and defense, including myself, and there are three convergences for the two sectors. First, their share of GDP became visible. Okay. Second, they became capital intensive, meaning more high-end, state-of-art, expensive equipment being used in both sectors. Third, they don't want shed blood. They want to save casualties. Health sectors is very understandable, but even defense sectors, political leaders, military leaders in most countries don't want to shed blood by replacing men with high-tech weapons as far as they can. That's the trend. So taking that as a backdrop, healthcare expenditure in Korea as a share of GDP was 8.7% recently. That's almost average for OECD countries. And pension expenditure as a share of GDP for Korea was 2.8% a year ago. OECD average was about 5%, which Korea is going to catch up very soon. So adding these two is very easily over 11%, while defense budget is only 2.3 or 2.4% of GDP. So my point is that looking at all this secular trend and statistical changes, what we feel as momentum for change is not an option to choose, but it's a must-do, must-solve agenda. It's a homework to do.
It's a necessity for us.
Yes. Nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to talk this difficult issue. But if we delay this more and more, the pains to come will be even greater. Right. That's the point.
I see. Well, hopefully we'll deal with it in the near future then, as you mentioned. Yes. All right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for your insight today. And Soa, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow, that is Wednesday.